He's waiting for you in the dark. He sits cross-legged, still as a placid lake, and patient as a praying monk 6 feet deep in meditation. He's been like this for so long, his body oil-slicked with deadly black grease, skin ancient and haggard, eyes black and flat with the kind of calm you'd only find in crawling insects and great white sharks. His lipless mouth is stretched across his jawbone in an ugly black rictus. He may be an old man, but trust us, he's got plenty of new tricks he'd love to show you. He sat in the loneliest place in the world, the deep, dark bowels of an SCP Foundation containment site, surrounded by a complex confluence of containment measures, different shapes, running liquids, bright lights, the kind of steel so thick a nuclear weapon would only leave it scuffed. All the things that had a tendency to confuse him, because that's all they ever did. The old man laughed to himself very quietly. All the people out there are so scared of him because of one immutable fact. He isn't trapped here, he's just resting. By virtue of his unique anomalous abilities to pass through solids at will and resist any form of physical damage they can dole out, there is no way to really contain him like all the others. All the SCP Foundation could hope to do was make leaving inconvenient enough for him to make his little adventures on the outside less appealing than just sitting around doing nothing. After all, he had all the time in the world. And when you always have a later, there's a lot less pressure to do anything now. But like all thinking creatures, and please be aware that SCP-106, the wretched, terrifying old man, is very much a thinking creature, he was subject to occasional boredom. And when most people are bored, they might play a video game, watch a few YouTube videos, or rewatch It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia for the 5th time. But for the old man, killing boredom involved, well, killing people. But not just killing people, of course. Truth be told, for him, killing was really the least entertaining part of the whole affair. The screams, the begging, the desperate pleas, warm tears on shaking cheeks, convulsions of pain, cold sweats, fear so intense it gives way to gibbering madness, the dull sheen of dead hope in their eyes when they realize that their doom is inevitable, and that he, their captor, their torturer, would decide the exact moment they slipped into the void. Oh, that was what he lived for. If you could call what the old man did living. He cracked his neck and licked his teeth. Was he salivating? All those thoughts about pain seemed to have got him worked up. He could feel the distant thumping of his heart, old black blood pumping through the dusty corridors of his vascular system, synapses booming and sparking with excitement at the thought of plumbing new depths of human misery, like a scholar of suffering, a pioneer of pain. All those silly Foundation drones, with the audacity to think they're in control, he'd teach them to scream again. Meanwhile, in the room for the old man's containment chamber, all hell was breaking loose. Monitors on the monster's vitals were all spiking. Heart and brain activity peaked, just as they always did before the old man decided to get active. Cameras in his containment chamber showed him rising steadily to his feet, cracking his joints, limbering up. His body started to produce that terrible corrosive mucus at an accelerated rate, pooling around his feet and unleashing squalls of noxious fumes as it melted into the floor. Years of Foundation testing, and they still couldn't find any material that could withstand that vile black slop. As the old man began strolling towards the wall, a containment specialist in the control room grabbed a nearby phone and sounded the alarm for the containment breach. They needed a mobile task force, and every guard on site mobilized to tackle 106 before he got into the facility proper and started causing havoc. They couldn't risk it escaping either. The infamous incident when the old man escaped for a Halloween massacre still haunted the nightmares of many a staff member. He had to be stopped. Now. A small fighting force was quickly armed and assembled, along with armor and several high-intensity portable lights to hopefully slow the monster down in time for them to grab a D-Class and set up the femur breaker. By the time they all reached the hallway they intended to use as a choke point for the escape, the old man was already halfway through the outer layer of defense. phasing through the wall with that same terrible, manic grin he always had when he was about to inflict terrible violence for the sheer fun of it. The guards and task force members trained their lights and weapons on him. All of them had seen terrible things on the job, the kind of things that would saddle almost anyone with a lifetime of trauma, but almost nothing compared to the horror of direct engagement during a 106 containment breach. That terrible old coffin dodger was hell on 2 legs. When they discovered to their horror that the lights didn't seem to be slowing him down as much as anticipated, they fell back on Plan B. That B standing for blast the living hell out of him with everything they had. The personnel opened fire, pumping round after round into his dark form. While each gave a loud, meaty splatter, the old man didn't even flinch. When he was close enough, all those months of lethargy gave way to sudden, deadly speed. In many ways, the old man was like a crocodile, a fierce and intelligent ambush predator who conserved his energy wisely. He could seem so deceptively languid that you could easily mistake him for something slow and harmless, but when you got within arm's reach, the sudden quickness and ferocity would take you off guard, and by then, it's already too late. Within 30 seconds, the old man was the only thing left alive in that hallway. All the guards and task force operatives sent to slow him down lay dead, dripping with his black mucus. There was silence, save for the quiet fizzing of the mucus eating into their clothes and skin. The old man sighed. How boring. He'd killed so many people now. It all started to seem a little samey. How many screams could you hear before they all just blended into a single shrill whine? You can get sick of even your favorite meal if you eat it too often. But that didn't matter. The old man had a different order of business today. He happened to be inside an SCP Foundation containment facility, filled with so many fascinating specimens of non-human entities that the one they called SCP-106 simply couldn't wait to torture. He'd only met a small portion of the ones they had contained here, but given what a fascinating experience his past attack on his fellow anomalies was, he couldn't wait to meet some more. Meanwhile, the site's top brass did all they could to try to mobilize a second response to the rogue senior citizen from hell currently strolling through their high-security containment facility. Could they get in contact with other mobile task forces deployed in the area? Maybe they could get Hammerdown or Samsara in on this mess before anything got really out of hand. The old man seemed more intent on something this time. They suspected even the femur breaker might not work in luring him back until he claimed whatever he deemed to be his prize. Maybe they should contact the O5 Council. Security guards were tracking 106's progress through the facility via their vast networks of security cameras. They warned any research, administration, and janitorial staff to clear out of his path, unless they felt like being tortured to death. He hadn't dragged anyone into his pocket dimension yet, so whoever that privilege was reserved for would probably be getting a particular sticky experience. They could only speculate as to the silent beast's intentions. One guard noticed something. When cross-referencing 106's movements with a map of the facility, they were able to triangulate where he was heading, straight for the containment chamber of SCP-096. The guard's lips curled into a slight smile, thinking, if one of you freaks can actually kill the other, maybe something positive will come out of this disaster. The old man was having a stroll down memory lane. The time prior, when he broke out of his cell and decided to hassle his fellow inmates, was certainly eventful. He wound up in the company of some cantankerous reptile and a Korean foxwoman, an unlikely pair if ever there was one. After finding himself in a room with them, he decided they should have a little more privacy and dragged them back into his pocket dimension for further fun. Of course, with two at once, his attention had been a little split. They spent as much time tussling with each other as resisting his attempts to torment them. They definitely put him through his paces that day, and he gave far better than he got. After so many hours of brutal mutilation, there was barely any of the lizard left, despite its frustrating insistence on quickly healing from so many of its wounds. Still, it was good exercise, even if the results had been a little less than satisfying. If he could get another anomaly alone, though, he'd be able to take his time and really savor the pain he caused. Oh, that sounded heavenly. Soon he came upon an incredibly strange containment chamber that quickly caught his eye. It looked like a huge metal cube, with no way in or out, not even a seam. Whatever was trapped in there, the old man thought it must be something that even the fools at the SCP Foundation really, truly wanted nothing to do with. But even more so than the strange sight, it was the sound that drew the old man in, tempting him like a siren song. It was weeping, a soft, sobbing keen that betrayed a bottomless well of misery. Whatever was making that crying sound had known true despair, or whatever passes for true despair before you've had a close encounter with the old man in his pocket dimension. The old man grinned and thought,
"Oh, Sonny, I'll give you something to really cry about."
He stepped forward and faced his way into the metal cube. The creature was in the corner. In contrast to that stupid lizard, this monster was pleasingly humanoid, with, presumably, all the familiar pain points. Splendid. The only real difference was color and proportion. It was far longer and ganglier than the average human, with grayish skin and no hair anywhere on its body. Still, it was something the old man could work with. The creature didn't even seem to register his presence. It just sat crumpled in the corner, weeping. Still grinning his lunatic grin, the old man approached and rested a moist hand on the creature's shoulder. Its pale skin began to fizzle from the intruder's corrosive touch. A pool of vile sludge began spreading out beneath his feet until the creature was encompassed too. Little by little, they sank into the old man's favorite place out of the world, the pocket dimension, his own personal, eternal, infinite dungeon, where the only laws are pain and terror for all but the old man himself. Little did he know, this time, the scores may be a little more even on that front. They both stood in that terrifying labyrinth of hallways and chambers where the old man had made countless lives infinitely worse than any terrible afterlife that could follow them. And still, this creature didn't seem to change its reaction. He was almost irritated by it. And what's more, this whole time, the creature hadn't even turned to look at him. He'd have to fix that too. The old man, with his shocking strength, gripped the monster's shoulder and whipped him around, staring into his face, bearing his black eyes and manic smile. But he couldn't help find what looked back at him disconcerting. Its eyes were blank and white, its face stretched and warped into a permanent grimace, like Munch's old painting, The Scream. And the second the old man laid eyes on it, that's exactly what it did. Its gaping mouth let out the most terrible wail the old man had ever heard in all his years of torturing. It was a scream of unknowable sadness and fear, but somehow the old man sensed that this creature didn't fear him. It feared itself, feared what it was about to do. What the hell had he dragged down here with him? Without warning, the terrible wail soon gave way to sudden and ferocious aggression. Just like the old man had dealt out to a group of Foundation guards and mobile task force agents earlier that same night, it was only out of a mix of pure luck and his own finely tuned animal instinct that the old man was able to dodge the first strike from the creature's long, lithe forelimb. He couldn't believe it. They were in his special place, and this victim of his had the audacity to fight back? Well, he'd soon put this monster in its place. As the monster continued roaring and swiping for him, the old man simply walked backwards into a nearby wall and disappearing into a black stain. Of course, the monster, better known to the Foundation as Scp-096 or the Shy Guy, simply crashed through the wall to give chase, but on the other side, just another wall. He disappeared. How? Typically, when something sees the face of the Shy Guy, he immediately has a kind of intuitive connection to them. He can sense their presence. It's burned into his mind. A homing beacon, an unstoppable imperative. He knows exactly where they are and how to get them. But nothing about this situation was typical. The Shy Guy felt all the murderous rage he normally did, but the rest was just static. Where was the life he needed to abolish hiding? Suddenly, the old man emerged behind him and forced his hand into the Shy Guy's back. His fist melted straight through flesh and skin, causing the creature to let out another terrible wail. But as could be expected, they didn't leave a scratch on the Shy Guy's indestructible skeleton. The Shy Guy pulled a 180 and swung for the old man again. but he was already gone. Here in the pocket dimension, the old man had the ultimate home turf advantage. Here, space and time were his playthings. In the infinite twisting, labyrinthian walls of the pocket dimension, the old man wasn't just the devil, he was God too. But it would take far more than some cheap tricks and bodily harm to dissuade the shy guy from his sole purpose in life. He began running through the old man's personal maze like a crazed lab rat, tearing through wall after wall, forever searching for the monster that trapped it here. He would see the smiling face of that rotten old man every so often, the flash of black eyes and dirty teeth in shadows. But every time it tried to strike the shadows, there would be nothing there. And every time he got a chance, the old man would emerge from the shadows behind the shy guy to strike back, clawing into his flesh and vanishing again before the trapped beast could retaliate. The nasty old sadist was now starting to have some fun. It was a reflex test, a classic game of high-stakes whack-a-mole, and every time the creature failed to strike him, its distress only seemed to grow. This was perfectly fine for the old man. After all, he enjoyed a little mental torment as much as he loved physical torture, and a human would have died or given in to despair long before now. This monster's wonderful mix of resilience and pain made it a great chew toy. The old man kept up this routine, baiting and striking until something unanticipated happened. He appeared, waited for the swing, disappeared as it approached, then reappeared behind the shy guy to deliver another painful strike. This time, however, it seemed his victim had anticipated his pattern. Before he could hit the creature, the shy guy turned, quicker than anything the old man had ever seen, and hit him with such force he flew through several walls in his own maze, shattering them as he went. He hit the ground, stunned by the fact that the shy guy had actually landed a hit, but he wasn't done. The shrieking monster came bounding after him. Before the old man could stand, it struck him again and again and again, pounding his vile body into the ground, which cracked and crumbled. The old man sneered and sank into a puddle of his mucus on the ground. The old man was gone again. SCP-096 screamed in a mix of rage, despair, and frustration, so consumed with its hunt that it didn't notice the pool of corrosive mucus was slowly growing. It began to rise, bubbling and hissing at SCP-096's feet, getting deeper and deeper and deeper as the walls rose taller and taller around it. The creature wailed until a tide of the awful stuff reached its face and cascaded down its throat, melting all the organs within. As the creature was fully submerged, SCP-106 manifested atop the wall and looked down, smiling spitefully. He thought,
"Oh, you may have had me there, boyo, but in the end, I always win. Nothing could survive that."
And yet bubbles still rose from the slop below. The old man gritted his rotten teeth and balled his fists in quiet anger. Moments later, back in our dimension, a portal opened in the ground of SCP-096's containment chamber. It vomited out SCP-096's skeleton, smothered in bubbling black goo, and SCP-106. 096 would probably be fully regenerated within a couple of hours, and if 682's encounter with him was anything to go by, probably extremely unwilling to interface with the old man. And the old man himself, who couldn't help but feel a little humiliated by the whole experience, was glad the two of them would probably never meet again. He left the regenerating 096 and commenced the walk of shame back to his containment chamber. They didn't even need the femur breaker. He just felt like having a sit-down and processing it all. Nobody else would ever know what happened in the pocket dimension that day, and for the old man's pride, that was probably for the best. But he'd know. He'd always know. By the night's end, he was sitting in his containment chamber again, forlornly wondering,
"God damn it, old timer. Have you lost your edge?"
Now go check out SCP-096, look at a picture of the Shy Guy in Space, the Shy Guy Questions and Theories, and SCP-106, the Old Man Origin Theories for more videos on today's terrifying combatants.